If someone had told me a year ago that my life would be irrevocably split into two distinct eras, before him and after him, I would have laughed. My life was not built for grand romantic narratives. It was a carefully curated collection of quiet routines, a fortress of solitude designed to keep the unpredictable world at a comfortable distance. My apartment was my sanctuary. My work as a freelance graphic designer, my silent companion. The highlight of my day was often the precise moment the kettle clicked off, signaling the readiness of my afternoon tea. It was a small life, a safe life. And then there was Mason. He was not a part of my curated world. He was a daily, incidental intrusion. The delivery driver. Every weekday, around 2 in the afternoon, his heavy brown truck would rumble to a stop in front of my building. He was a constant, a fixed point in my otherwise fluid schedule of deadlines and color palettes. I'd see him through my window, a broad-shouldered silhouette against the sun, hauling boxes that seemed weightless in his grasp. From my second-story perch, he was a figure of pure, uncomplicated capability. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of physical confidence. There was no hesitation in his step, no wasted energy. He was solid, grounded, a piece of the real world that I only ever observed through glass. Our interactions were laughably brief. A buzz from the intercom. My clipped, "I'll be right down." Then the heavy thud of the lobby door and a few seconds of polite, excruciating silence as I signed the digital scanner. "Thanks," he'd grunt, his voice a low rumble that always seemed to vibrate in my chest. "Thank you," I'd reply, my own voice feeling thin and reedy in comparison. And that was it. The entire script. For months, I built a person out of these fragments. Mason, in my mind, was a man of simple pleasures. A guy who probably played softball on the weekends, drank cheap beer with his buddies, and had a pretty girlfriend who laughed at all his jokes. He was straight. So fundamentally, unequivocally straight that it was practically a physical attribute, like the dark scruff on his jaw or the corded muscles in his forearms. This assumption was my shield. It allowed me to look. It made the heat that coiled in my stomach when he'd look me in the eye for a fraction of a second feel like a safe, manageable fantasy. A little secret I kept locked away in the quietest corner of my heart. He was a painting in a gallery, beautiful and compelling, but something you could never, ever touch. The distance was everything. It was the air I breathed. The professional boundary of customer and service provider. The social chasm between a guy like him and a guy like me. The uncrossable ocean of assumed sexuality. I existed on one side, and he on the other. It was a perfectly stable, perfectly agonizing arrangement. Until the sky broke open. It started as a smear of bruised purple on the horizon, a distant grumble of thunder that I dismissed as ambient noise. I was deep in a project, tweaking the kerning on a font, lost in the miniature world on my screen. The world outside was just a backdrop. But the backdrop refused to stay quiet. The grumble became a roar. The sky darkened with an alarming speed, plunging my sunlit apartment into a premature twilight. Rain began to fall, not in drops, but in solid wind-driven sheets that hammered against my windows. It was a violent, sudden squall, the kind that feels personal. My lights flickered once, twice. Then they surrendered completely, leaving me in the disorienting gray gloom. My computer screen went black. The hum of the refrigerator died. The silence that rushed and was absolute, broken only by the percussive assault of the rain. And then a new sound, a frantic, desperate buzzing from the intercom. My heart leaped into my throat. No one ever buzzed me unexpectedly. My world was by appointment only. I fumbled for the button, my hand shaking slightly. Hello. Static. And then a voice, distorted by the rain and the failing connection, but unmistakable. It's Mason, from a delivery service. Mason, of course. It was 2 in the afternoon. "My truck won't start," he shouted over a sudden, deafening crack of thunder. "And my phone's dead. Look, this is a weird ask, but could I just come in for a minute? To use your charger? Until this blows over." Every instinct I'd screamed no. "No, you can't come in. No, You can't breach the walls of my fortress. No, you can't bring your solid, real, terrifying presence into my safe, curated space. The carefully constructed distance between us was about to be obliterated by a dead battery and a thunderstorm. Okay, I heard myself say, the word feeling alien in my own mouth. Okay, come up. I buzzed the lobby door open and stood there in the sudden darkness of my hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The storm had not just disrupted my routine. It had invited the single most disruptive element of my life inside. He took the stairs two at a time. I could hear his heavy work boots on the steps, a rhythmic, approaching thunder that echoed the storm outside. The sound got closer, louder, until it stopped right outside my door. A brief pause, then a knock. Not loud, but solid. Firm. I opened the door, and he filled the frame. He was bigger up close, without the context of a doorway or a truck to scale him against. Water streamed from his hair, plastering dark strands to his forehead. His uniform shirt was soaked through, clinging to the hard lines of his chest and shoulders. He looked less like a delivery driver and more like a force of nature, a piece of the storm that had broken loose and washed up at my door. "Sorry about this," he said, his voice that same low rumble, but now was inside my apartment, vibrating in the very air I was breathing. I wouldn't ask, but he gestured vaguely outside, where the world was a blur of gray water and wind. "It's fine," I lied, stepping back to let him in. "Come on." He hesitated for a second, his eyes scanning the dim interior of my apartment. He was seeing my space, my books arranged by color on the shelves, my minimalist art prints, the whole quiet, ordered landscape of my life. I felt suddenly, intensely exposed, as if he were reading the pages of my diary. Then he stepped inside, and the world shifted on its axis. He brought the storm in with him, the smell of rain and wet asphalt, and something else, something uniquely him, a clean, sharp scent like ozone and soap. It filled my small entryway, displacing the familiar smell of old books and brewing tea. My apartment was no longer just my apartment. It was a space that now contained him. "Power's out everywhere, I guess," he said, running a hand through his wet hair, sending a spray of droplets onto my floor. "It went out a few minutes ago," I said, my voice tight. I was acutely aware of everything. The drip of water from his jacket onto the hardwood. The sound of his breathing, slow and steady. The sheer physical volume he occupied. He was holding his phone, a dark, useless rectangle in his large hand. "I just need a bit of a charge so I can call dispatch." A perfectly reasonable request. A simple, logistical problem. But my mind was a chaotic swirl of panic and a strange, thrilling terror. The power was out. How is he going to charge his phone? "The outlets are dead," I stated, the obviousness of it hanging stupidly in the air between us. He looked at the dead phone, then at me. For the first time, I saw a crack in the monolith of his confidence. A flicker of frustration, of weariness. It was a surprisingly human expression. "Right," he said, and a short, humorless laugh escaped him. "Of course." He looked tired, not just physically tired from hauling boxes, but a deeper, bone-deep exhaustion I recognized. It was there in the slight slump of his shoulders, the lines around his eyes that I'd never been close enough to see before. There was also a thin, white scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a detail completely invisible from my window. My carefully constructed fantasy version of him was dissolving in real time, replaced by this wet, tired, stranded man in my hallway. "I have a power bank," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "A portable one. It's charged." His eyes met mine, and for a second, the gratitude in them was so direct, so unguarded, it was like a physical blow. "Seriously? Man, you be a lifesaver." I nodded, unable to speak, and turned to get it from my office. My legs felt unsteady. I was in a position of power, however small. I had something he needed. The dynamic, for the first time ever, was not him providing a service for me. It was the other way around. It was a strange, heady feeling. When I came back, he had taken off his soaking jacket and hung it on the back of a dining chair, a shockingly domestic act. He was standing by the window, looking out at the deluge. "Here," I said, holding out the small, dense brick of the charger and a cable. He turned, and as he reached for it, our hands brushed. It was nothing, a flicker of contact, skin against skin for less than a second. But a jolt went through me, hot and sharp, like licking a battery. My breath hitched. Heat flooded my face, my neck, my entire chest. It was so intense, so overwhelming, that I was sure he must have felt it too, a sudden discharge of all the secret, silent energy I had poured into watching him for months. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. He didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he gave no sign. He just plugged the cable into his phone, which immediately lit up with a low battery symbol. A small sigh of relief escaped him. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer now. "Really?" I just nodded, my throat too tight to form words. I retreated to the other side of the room, putting the width of my small living area between us. A safe distance. But it was too late. The barrier had been breached. The fortress was compromised. He was inside, and I had felt the back of his hand, and nothing in my quiet, ordered world would ever be the same. He made the call. His voice was low and professional, explaining the situation to his dispatcher. A dead truck, a flooded road. He was told to stay put until the storm passed, and they could send a tow. It could be hours. Hours. The word echoed in the sudden silence after he hung up. He was going to be here for hours. Trapped. With me. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated by the drumming of the rain. It was a physical weight in the room. He was a stranger in my house, and I was a terrible host, hovering awkwardly by my bookshelf, pretending to be interested in the spines of books I'd read a dozen times. "I can wait in the hall if you want," he said suddenly, his voice startling me out of my trance. I looked at him. He was leaning against the wall, his phone charging on the floor beside him. He looked uncomfortable, hyper-aware that he was an intruder. This giant, imposing man was trying to make himself smaller for my sake. "No," I said, the word coming out with more force than I intended. "Don't be ridiculous. It's fine." It was not fine. It was the furthest thing from fine. My stomach was a frantic knot of bees. My mind was racing, trying to process the sheer, overwhelming fact of his presence. I needed to do something. Something normal. "Do you want some tea?" I asked. "Or coffee? I have a gas stove, so I can still boil water." He looked surprised. "Yeah. Or water. Or, I don't know what you drink." My face was burning. Of course a guy like him didn't drink tea. He drank beer. Or whiskey. Things I did not have. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was the first time I had ever seen him smile. It transformed his entire face, softening the hard lines, making him look younger. "Tea sounds good, actually," he said. "Thanks." In the kitchen, I moved on autopilot, my hands shaking as I filled the kettle. The small, familiar space felt alien with him in it. He followed me, not wanting to be left alone in the living room, and leaned against the doorframe, watching me. His presence was a tangible pressure at my back. I could feel his eyes on me as I took down 2 mugs, my favorite worn ceramic one for me, and a plain white one for him. I was intensely aware of every small detail. The way the candlelight from the counter flickered across the planes of his face. The dark, damp curls of his hair beginning to dry. The logo on his uniform shirt, the letters slightly stretched across the width of his chest. He wasn't a fantasy anymore. He was a man watching me make him tea in my kitchen. "So, you're a designer?" he asked, gesturing with his head toward my office, visible from the kitchen. "Graphic designer," I clarified, my voice barely a whisper. "I work from home." "Must be nice," he said. Quiet. I risked a glance at him. He wasn't looking at my office anymore. He was looking at me. His expression was open, curious. All my assumptions about him, about his simple life and his pretty girlfriend, felt flimsy and ridiculous. I knew nothing about this man. "It is quiet," I said. Sometimes too quiet. The admission slipped out, a raw, honest thing I had never said aloud to anyone. He nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "I get that. My truck is loud. The warehouse is loud. My apartment building is loud. Sometimes I think I haven't heard real quiet in years." We stood there for a moment, in the semi-darkness, The only sounds the hiss of the gas flame under the kettle and the relentless drumming of the rain. And it was quiet, a shared quiet. It felt different from my usual solitude. It was not an absence. It was a presence. The kettle whistled, a shrill, welcome interruption. I poured the water, my hand still not quite steady. I handed him the white mug. Our fingers brushed again as he took it. This time, I was prepared for the jolt. I steeled myself against it, but it still shot up my arm, a secret, illicit spark in the dark. He held the mug in both hands, letting the steam warm his face. Thanks, he trailed off, realizing he didn't know my name. Leo, I supplied. Leo, he repeated, testing the sound of it. I'm Mason. I know, I said, and then immediately regretted it, the words sounding stalkerish and weird. I mean, from the packages. Your name is on the scanner thing. He smiled again, that same small, devastating smile. Right. We took our mugs and sat in the living room. I sat in my usual armchair. He took the sofa. The space between us felt both immense and infinitesimally small. The room was dark, the only light coming from 2 candles I'd placed on the coffee table. The flickering flames cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the familiar space feel strange and intimate. A bubble in time, sealed off from the rest of the world by the storm. We didn't talk much at first. We just drank our tea, listening to the rain. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was comfortable, companionable. I watched him over the rim of my mug. I watched the way the candlelight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the way he held the delicate ceramic mug in his large, calloused hands. Hands that could probably crush it without a thought, but held it with a surprising gentleness. This is the nicest my day has been all week, he said, his voice low and soft in the quiet room. My heart did a painful little flip. Trapped in a stranger's apartment during a blackout, I asked, a hint of my usual sarcastic armor creeping back in. Yeah, he said, his eyes meeting mine in the gloom. He was completely serious. It's warm, it's quiet, and the tea is good. All the air went out of my lungs. He wasn't just being polite. He meant it. This man, who I had imagined lived a loud, full, happy life, found solace in my quiet, gray world. My ex hated the quiet, he said, as if it were the most natural continuation of the conversation. She said it made her nervous. Always had to have the TV on, music playing. Drove me crazy. His ex. A she. The shield of my assumption clicked back into place, but it felt different now. Less like a protective wall, and more like a flimsy piece of cardboard. It confirmed what I thought I knew, but hearing it spoken aloud still sent a pang of something sharp and disappointing through my chest. I'm sorry, I said, not knowing what else to say. Don't be, he shrugged. It was a long time ago. We just wanted different things. She wanted noise. I think I just wanted a place to breathe. He looked around my apartment, at the neat stacks of books, the clean lines of the furniture, the uncluttered space. This place feels like you can breathe. He was seeing me, not just as a customer, a signature on a screen. He was seeing the life I had built, the person I was, and he was not recoiling from it. He was admiring it. The storm raged on outside, a wild, chaotic symphony. But inside my apartment, a different kind of storm was brewing, a quiet, internal tempest of hope and fear. The hours passed in a slow, strange dream. We talked. We actually talked. I learned that he was saving up to open his own garage, that he was good with his hands but hated paperwork, that his family lived 3 states away and he hadn't seen them in over a year. He learned that I grew up in a small town, that I moved to the city for the anonymity, that I loved the precision and order of my work because my childhood had been so chaotic. We were 2 solitary people, sharing our solitudes in the flickering candlelight. At some point, he got up to look at my bookshelf. He ran his fingers over the spines, his touch surprisingly gentle. You've read all these? He asked. Most of them, I said. Some of them more than once. He pulled one out, an old, dog-eared copy of a classic I adored. My dad loved this book. He opened it, his thumbs stroking the worn page. A wave of vulnerability washed over his face, a deep, unguarded sadness. He used to read it to me. My carefully guarded heart cracked wide open. This was too much. This was a level of intimacy I was not prepared for. This strong, silent man was sharing a piece of his history, a piece of his grief with me. He passed away a few years ago, he added, his voice thick. I stood up and walked over to him, my body moving before my brain could protest. I stood beside him, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could smell the faint scent of the tea on his breath. "I'm sorry, Mason," I said, and this time the words were full of a genuine ache. For him, for his loss. He didn't look at me. He just kept staring at the page. "It's okay. It's just, sometimes it hits me." And then he did something that stopped my world. He leaned his head sideways, just for a second, and rested it against my shoulder. It was the briefest of contacts. The weight of his head, solid and warm, against me. It was not a romantic gesture. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated exhaustion. A moment of seeking comfort from the only other person in the room. But for me, it was everything. It was a confession without words. It was a surrender. It was an act of trust so profound it made my knees weak. I stood perfectly still, afraid to breathe, afraid to move and break the spell. He straightened up a moment later, putting the book back on the shelf as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. A line had been crossed. He had leaned on me. The candles were burning low, the wax pooling at their bases. The storm outside had softened, the rain now a steady, gentle drumming instead of a furious assault. The world was slowly returning to normal. But I was not normal. I was fundamentally altered. "You're staring at me," he said, his voice a low murmur. He had turned to face me. He was so close. The space between us was charged, electric. I couldn't deny it. Yes, the word was a breath. A confession. "Why?" he asked. Not an accusation. A genuine question. He wanted to know. And in the dim, flickering light, surrounded by the scent of rain and wax and the warm, human presence of this man, all my fear just evaporated. What was the point of hiding anymore? He was here. He had seen my quiet life, and he had not run. He had leaned on me. "Because I think you're beautiful," I said. The words hung in the air between us, terrifying and liberating. I watched his face, bracing for the disgust, the hasty retreat, the awkward laugh. But none of that came. He just watched me, his dark eyes searching my face. I could see the flicker of a dozen emotions in their depths. Surprise, confusion, and something else. Something I couldn't name. Something that looked terrifyingly like recognition. He raised a hand, slowly, as if not to startle me. He cupped my jaw, his thumbs stroking softly against my skin. His hand was warm and rough with calluses. It was the most incredible thing I had ever felt. "No one's ever said that to me," he whispered. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It was not a frantic, passionate kiss. It was slow, hesitant, questioning. His lips were soft, tasting faintly of tea and the storm. It was a kiss of pure, breathtaking honesty. It was a question, and my response as I leaned into him, as my own hand came up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath my palm, was a resounding yes. Yes, this is real. This is happening. The world outside, with its rules and its assumptions and its noise, fell away completely. There was only the small, quiet room, the dying candlelight, and the impossible, undeniable fact of Mason's lips on mine. I woke to the aggressive, unfamiliar hum of the refrigerator. Sunlight, sharp and unforgiving, streamed through the gaps in my blinds, striping the room with light. The power was back on. The storm was over. And I was alone. I sat up, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The other side of my bed was empty. The indentation on the pillow beside me was the only evidence he had been there at all. My apartment felt horribly silent, but it wasn't my usual peaceful quiet. It was a hollow, ringing silence. An absence. A single white mug sat on my coffee table, a stark reminder in the morning light. My own mug was next to it. The candles had burned down to nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. It was a mistake. The thought screamed through my mind. It was a fluke, a weird, intimate bubble created by the storm and the darkness. An anomaly. In the harsh light of day, reality had reasserted itself. The pretty girlfriend, the softball games, the cheap beer. He had woken up next to me, realized what he'd done, and fled. I scrambled out of bed, my half-clothed body feeling clumsy and exposed. I checked the front door. The chain was unlatched. His work jacket was gone from the back of the chair. He was gone. I sank onto the sofa, my head in my hands. A wave of shame so intense, it made me physically nauseous washed over me. I had been so stupid. I had read everything wrong. I had taken his exhaustion, his moment of vulnerability, and twisted it into something it wasn't. I had confessed my pathetic, secret feelings, and he had, what? Pitted me? Experimented. The memory of the kiss, of his hands on me, of the soft words we'd exchanged in the dark, now felt tainted. A humiliation. I had broken the one rule of my carefully constructed life. I had taken a risk, and I had been punished for it. My solitude, once a comfort, now felt like a prison sentence. The quiet I had cultivated was now just a reminder of how loud the silence could be when it was filled with the ghost of someone else's presence. The day passed in a gray, miserable blur. I couldn't work. I couldn't read. I couldn't think. I just sat, replaying every moment, every word, every touch, dissecting them for clues I had missed for the exact moment I had made my fatal error. Around 2 o'clock, I heard the familiar rumble of the delivery truck. My breath caught in my throat. My heart started to pound with a sick mixture of terror and a tiny, stupid flicker of hope. Would he come to the door? What would he say? What would I say? I crept to the window, peering through the blinds like a spy in my own home. The truck stopped. The door opened, and a different man got out. He was shorter than Mason, with thinning hair and a paunch that strained against his uniform. He carried a small box to the front door of the building. The flicker of hope died, snuffed out completely. It was over. Mason had asked for a different route. He couldn't even stand the thought of seeing me again. The rejection was so absolute, so efficiently executed, it was breathtaking. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. I ordered things I didn't need just for the chance to see the truck, to confirm the new driver was permanent. He was. My pathetic experiment only served to twist the knife. I tried to erase Mason. I tried to go back to before. I cleaned my apartment obsessively, trying to scrub away the memory of his scent, the ghost of his presence. But it was no use. He had reconfigured the very molecules of the air. My armchair was where I had sat watching him. The kitchen door frame was where he had leaned. My bed was the worst. I was a fool, a lonely, quiet man who had mistaken a moment of shared humanity for something more. And now I was paying the price. The fortress was rebuilt, but the walls felt thinner now, and the silence inside was unbearable. On the third evening, I was trying to force myself to eat when there was a knock on my door. Not a buzz from the intercom. A knock, right on the door of my apartment. My blood ran cold. It could only be one person. No one else ever came here. I stood frozen, my fork hovering over my plate. Maybe if I stayed quiet, he would go away. Another knock, louder this time, more insistent. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I couldn't face him. I couldn't bear the awkward apology, the pity in his eyes. Lau. His voice came through the door, muffled but unmistakable. Leo, I know you're in there. Please, just open the door. He sounded strange, not angry, not confident. He sounded nervous. Against my better judgment, I found myself moving toward the door. My hand was shaking as I reached for the knob. I took a deep breath and opened it. It was him, but it wasn't the delivery driver. He was out of uniform, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. He was holding nothing. He had no excuse to be here. He just stood there, looking at me, his expression a mess of anxiety and something else I couldn't read. Hi, he said, his voice raspy. I just stared at him, my throat closed tight. Can I come in? He asked, his gaze flickering past me into the apartment. I should have said no. For my own self-preservation, I should have closed the door in his face. But I was weak. I stepped aside. He walked in, and the apartment immediately shrank again, filled with his presence. He didn't go far, just stood in the entryway, shoving his hands into his pockets, looking anywhere but at me. The silence was a screaming void. I had to fill it. "You asked for a new route," I said. It came out as a flat, dead statement, an accusation. He flinched and finally looked at me. His eyes were full of a raw, painful emotion. "Yeah, I did. I see," I said, my voice dripping with a coldness I didn't know I possessed. "No," he said, shaking his head, taking a step closer. "No, you don't see. I'm an idiot, Leo." I panicked. I just stared at him, waiting. "I woke up that morning," he started, his voice low and halting, "and the sun was out and the power was on, and it was all real. It wasn't just some weird dream in a storm. It was real. And you were there, sleeping, and you looked so peaceful. And it scared the hell out of me." He took another step. We were only a few feet apart now. "I've never done that before," he said, the words costing him. "With a guy. I've never felt that. What I felt in here with you." My cold, protective anger began to melt, replaced by a fragile, terrifying hope. "So I ran," he admitted, his voice full of self-loathing. I left, because I didn't know what to do. I got back to my truck, and I felt like a complete coward. I spent the last 3 days driving around a different part of the city, thinking about you, about this apartment, about how quiet it was. I couldn't get it out of my head. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I've been miserable, waking up in my own loud apartment, going to my loud job. It all just felt wrong, because it wasn't here. He was vulnerable, more vulnerable than he had been in the storm. The confident facade was completely gone, stripped away, leaving only this nervous, honest man who had come back. He had come back for me. "Why did you come back, Mason?" I whispered, needing to hear it. He closed the remaining distance between us. He reached out, not to kiss me, but to just lay his hand on my arm. His touch was hesitant but warm, grounding. "Because being scared is better than being without you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Even if I only had you for one night. That quiet was the best thing I've felt in years. And I was stupid to run away from it. From you." All the air left my body in a rush. The fear, the doubt, the shame, it all went with it. All that was left was him, his hand on my arm, his honest, terrified eyes looking into mine. "I was scared too," I confessed. "When you were gone, I thought it was all a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," he said, his voice firm now. "It was the only thing that's made sense in a long time." And then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He unlocked it and held it out to me. The new contact screen was open. "Put your number in," he said. "My personal number. Not so I can tell you about a package. Just so you can call me. Or I can call you. So I don't have to just show up at your door like a creep." It was such a simple, modern gesture. An exchange of numbers. But it felt monumental. It was a tangible promise. A bridge being built across the chasm that had separated us. My hand was shaking as I took the phone and typed in my name and number. I handed it back to him. He looked at the screen, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. The same smile that had undone me in the candlelight. "Leo," he said, as if memorizing it. He put the phone away, and then he cupped my face with both his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheekbones, and he kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation. It was a kiss of relief, of recommitment, a kiss that said, "I'm here. I'm not running anymore." It was a promise. And I promised him back. A few months later, I woke to the familiar, comforting hum of the refrigerator. Sunlight streamed through the blinds. The apartment was quiet, but it was not empty. Mason was asleep beside me, his arm thrown protectively over my waist, his breathing a slow, steady rhythm against my back. He hadn't left. He never left anymore. I lay there for a long time, just listening to him breathe, feeling the solid weight of his arm, the warmth of his body next to mine. There was no morning after anxiety. There was no fear. There was just a deep, profound sense of peace, a rightness. Eventually, I slipped out of bed, moving carefully so as not to wake him. I went into the kitchen and started making coffee. His favorite mug, the plain white one, was already sitting by the coffee maker, waiting. His toothbrush was in a holder next to mine in the bathroom. A worn-out pair of his work boots sat by my front door. Slowly, quietly, his life had merged with mine. His noise had found a home in my quiet. The smell of coffee filled the apartment. I heard a groan from the bedroom, the sound of him stirring. A moment later, he appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He was wearing a pair of my pajama bottoms that were far too short on him. He looked rumpled and soft, and so incredibly beautiful it stole my breath. He didn't say anything. He just walked over, wrapped his arms around me from behind, and rested his chin on my shoulder, burying his face in my neck. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I leaned back against his solid, warm chest. "Morning." We stood like that for a while as the coffee maker gurgled and hissed, two people in a quiet kitchen, holding on to each other in the morning light. It was a simple domestic moment, the kind of moment I never, in a million years, thought I would have. My life used to be a fortress designed to keep the world out. But I hadn't accounted for the fact that someone might just knock, ask to borrow a charger, and end up staying forever. Mason hadn't breached my walls. He had simply shown me that they were doors. He wasn't a disruption to my routine. He had become the routine, the best part of it. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the beautiful, unexpected delivery that showed up on my doorstep and changed absolutely everything. My life was still quiet, but it was no longer lonely. It was a shared quiet, filled with the steady, comforting presence of the man currently holding me as if he never planned on letting go. And I hoped he never would.